I have to say I've gotten pretty good at making an iced coffee during this quarantine. So it's the first of the month, and that means that I have to record a wrap up. So my April reading month was actually pretty similar to my March reading month in the fact that I also read 5 books. So it's not like the worst number in the world, but it's also not like the best number in the world. So I'm hoping that in May I can do a bit better, but still 5 books is a pretty good reading month for me. So the first book that I read in April was Imagine Me by Tata Mafi. So this is the last book in the Shatter Me series, and I ended up really enjoying it. I think I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, which I know is probably a super high rating for this book specifically, or really any of the books in the sequel trilogy, but I definitely liked this one the most out of any of those books, and it just really wrapped things up so perfectly. Everything was very high stakes in this book, which is something that I felt was really lacking in the first 2 books. And I also really enjoyed Kenji's point of view, which I hadn't enjoyed in the prior 2 books. For some reason, I love Kenji so much, but typically his point of view is just not my favorite. But in this book, he was perfect. He was on his A game. I loved seeing everything that was going on through his perspective, especially since he is kind of more of an outside character, at least in this series, because it does focus so heavily on a lot of the children of the Supreme Commanders. So I felt like he really needed his perspective just to kind of get a grasp on the entire world. But I also really loved Juliet's perspective. In this one, it was definitely very different, not something that I was expecting. I'm truly going to miss all of my favorite characters. I 100% cried after I finished this book. It was just so emotional, and I've definitely grown a lot with these characters. They've been in my life ever since I was around 18 or 19 years old, and I just love them so much, and I definitely owe a lot of my reading taste and also my writing to Tata Mafi and her wonderful writing. So I don't know, I'm just like super sad. I'm definitely going to miss this world and these characters. So the first one is Hummingbird by Sophia Elaine Hansen, and the second one is Sunfish by Shelby Eileen, and I liked these both so much. I've had these on my shelf for so long, and I can't believe it took me this long to finally get to them. They're so wonderful. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I really loved them both so much, and I totally recommend them. So if you're looking for any good like modern poetry collections, these are definitely ones I would recommend checking out. And I have read other poetry collections by Shelby Eileen, and they are such a wonderful poet, and I've loved every single collection that I've read from them. And then this was my first one by Shelby, and I also have another one that's actually on my TBR, which I will show after the entire wrap up. But yeah, there's really not much to say about these collections. They're just really good poetry, and if you need something that's really fast to read, that's very impactful, then I would definitely recommend these 2 collections. The next book I read was actually an audiobook that I rented from Hoopla, and that was The Luxe by Anna Godberson. And I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars. I really didn't like it. The entire book was just so dry and so boring. It felt like there was 0 plot. Like, there were so many characters, and it felt like all the plots were supposed to be connected, but they were, but they also weren't connected in any sort of like interesting or exciting way. I kind of went into this expecting it to be sort of like a Gossip Girl set in the late 1800s, and it tried to be that, but it really didn't push the limits. It really didn't go there for me, and it definitely wasn't dramatic enough. Basically, in my really short review, I said the characters are about as deep as a puddle, and they are the most boring rich kids I've ever read about. This book pushes no boundaries and doesn't shock me in the slightest. Also, is there a plot? I don't think there's even a hint of a plot. It's basically just well-written scenes about boring characters strung together into a book-shaped object thing. And that's exactly how I feel about this book. I really didn't like it, and I definitely will not be reading anything else from this author. I'm so sorry. This just completely turned me off of that author and the entire series. I honestly don't care about any of these characters, and I'm so glad that I didn't waste my time like years ago reading it, because it was just bad. It was just really bad. And then ending on a really high note, I read Ruthless Gods by Emily A. Duncan. So if you've been following me on Twitter recently for the past couple of weeks, you know that I've been reading this book and loving it so much. I've definitely tweeted a lot about it, probably more than I should have, but hopefully I didn't give away any spoilers. And I also did a reading vlog for this book, so I will link that down below. And I loved it so much. It's the sequel to Wicked Saints, which I loved as well just a couple of months ago, and this one got a 5 out of 5 stars as well. I think, like I've said before, if you're a fan of Star Wars, especially the sequel trilogy and especially Reylo, you're going to love this book. It was just so amazing. Like, I loved the first book obviously, but this book really pushed it even further. It was even more well written than the first book. It was definitely a lot easier to understand, which was great. And I just loved the character development in this book. It really just took the characters from the first book and then threw them out into the lions, threw them out into the wilderness, and really let them kind of like marinate in their characters and really try to figure out who they are as individual people. The character relationships in this book are so rich and so layered and complex, and I just loved them so much. I cannot say enough good things about this book, especially since I've just been sitting with it ever since then, and oh my gosh, it really blew my mind. I feel like this definitely sets a higher bar for YA fantasy, and it's just so good. And also look at the cover, it's just so beautiful. I literally look at this cover every day, especially the spine on my bookshelf, and I love it so much. It's just the best. Like, look at how gorgeous that is. And then on the inside cover, where it says darkness never works alone, it's just, oh, I love this book so much. It's beautiful, and I can't really say much else because it is a sequel, so I don't want to spoil anything. But if you liked Wicked Saints, you're going to like this one 10 times more. Okay, so that was my entire wrap up. So I'm gonna move on to talk about my TBR super quickly, because really not much has changed about my TBR. So currently I'm over halfway through this book. That's The Midnight Lie by Marie Rutkovsky. And like I said, over halfway through. I'm currently doing a reading vlog about this book, so you will see that soon. And I love it. It's literally mind-blowing. The writing is gorgeous. The characters are so wonderfully complex, and the world building is so great. And if you're looking for a fresh take on YA fantasy, this is your book, especially with characters who are aged up a little bit, so they're 19 and over. And oh, I just love this book so much. I did not expect to love it from the first couple of pages. Like, the writing style is very different. It's definitely written more in the style of like an adult fantasy, but it's still super accessible writing that's really, you know, easy to understand. The world building isn't too complex to where it's like, whoa, a lot of information. It's just a really simple world with really great characters, and it just works amazingly. And then I saw a tweet about this book yesterday, so I had to add it to my TBR, and that's The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu, and it was described as lush, which is a huge buzzword for me. So if any fantasy is described as lush, I totally want to read about it, and I'm just super excited about this one. This book follows the sister of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and I've never read a book about her, so that's super interesting. And I love Marie Lu, I love her books, I love her writing, so I'm hopefully going to love this book as well. So this is currently my TBR. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've definitely seen all of these books already mentioned. So I don't really feel like I have to do an in-depth, like, going through each book. So yeah, here's my TBR for the foreseeable future. Okay, so that was my entire wrap up and a little sneak peek at my TBR. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you read any really good books this month, then let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear them, and I would love to have some new recommendations. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!